So, when it comes to your health and preservation of life, how important is food really? Now, Ayurveda, right, which is the science of life, Ayuhu means life and Veda means science. How much importance does Ayurveda give to food in the preservation of life? Now, for this, Ayurveda has identified that there are three different factors, three different pillars to health and preservation. And that is how you eat, also known as ahara, how you sleep, also known as nidra, and then how you procreate, also known as brahmacharya. Following some discipline around the three of these, and we'll go into why that is the case, will allow us to really preserve and value our life and use our vehicles for higher goals. And right at this point, I actually want to point out that Ayurveda and yoga are sister sciences. But yoga is the science of energy, it is the science of self discovery, while Ayurveda is the science of matter, of the gross body. And it seeks to preserve this vehicle so that you can have an experience on this planet, but you can also use the vehicle to kind of go deeper within and discover who you are. So let's go into the first aspect, which we're going to be covering a lot more of, which is ahar. That ahar is, or food, is that which kind of keeps you in homeostasis, keeps continuously nourishes you, because in every second cells are being annihilated in your body and being regenerated. So ahar, or food, is that raw material that you need to regenerate those cells, to keep life going and to keep your body in a certain environment or homeostasis. The second one is nidra, or sleep. That while your body is in motion and you're performing tasks and you're living this life, you also need to take that step back. It's that time when your body conducts silent repair. And if it's important to be in motion and live life, it's equally important, according to the Ayurvedic understanding, to kind of take a back seat and allow your body to do that extensive cleaning that it requires every night. And now the third aspect, brahmacharya, how do you procreate? Now this becomes really important because evolutionarily, right, biologically, we are made to procreate, to enjoy the world and keep it going. Now, that being said, when you study how our organs functions in Ayurveda, our reproductive fluids are actually fed last after all the tissues are being fed because they're very essential. They're also called the vital fluids and they carry potential for life. So they're very precious. How you use them or how you lose them becomes extremely important. So, according to Ayurveda, right, following a certain regimen and discipline around the use of your vital fluids will allow you to preserve your life and the potential for life, your fertility, depending on how you use your fluids. What might be interesting to note here is that for those who are following a spiritual path and who seek to kind of disconnect from worldly experiences, it's these exact same fluids that are actually used for an awakening, for a Kundalini rising. Now, with that, let's come back to our topic for the day, which is ahar, is food. Now, since this entire program, right, is about bringing the attention back to you and how you relate to food, let's just even start out by thinking about what is it that you eat for? What is the function of food in your body? And it might be different at different times. For example, you might say that I use food just because I want to build muscle, or just to get done with my nourishment, or because I enjoy eating food, or I use food to swallow my feelings. But really getting honest with yourself and taking a few moments to think about what is the function of food supposed to be in your body. And now I'm going to give you the Ayurvedic perspective on this, right? Most of us, when we think of it intellectually, might think that I consume food so I can nourish my body and tissues. Well, let me tell you, that's actually the second function of food. Because the most important function that your body carries is homeostasis, is to kind of keep the environment of your body exactly how it's supposed to be. We understand this really well when it comes to farming or it comes to our plants. That the first thing, even if you were to go and plant a seed, the first thing you would check for is how is the soil, how is the sunlight, how is the irrigation. Because you know that only when the ecosystem is right and working, only then can the seed transform into a potential plant. Similarly, only when your body enjoys a certain level of homeostasis or balance can your food actually be transformed into nutrients. Otherwise, you can go on planting seeds, and if you have an arid land or if you have less sun or less irrigation, there's going to be no transformation. So, understanding, right, that how does my food affect the environment of my body? How does it keep me or take me out of balance? Is the first function of food is to keep you in balance. The second function of food is to nourish your body and your tissues and to provide the nutrients that are required for cell and tissue building. So while this sounds like an interesting concept, hey, I use my food to keep my environment right so that they keep transforming. But how are we going to assess what the environment of the gut is? And how does Ayurveda really look at foods? I mean, the only way that we've learned to look at foods today in our generation is to look at nutrient content. And to be honest with you, how much do we understand it beyond the jargon that we read on labels? How do you intuitively know what this food does to my body? And this is where I find Ayurveda becoming really useful because it has a really profound way to look at foods. It understands that if it all comes from the same universe and the same planet, there has to be a code which will allow me to assess my foods and how they act in my body. And for this, Ayurveda offers two brilliant principles that I'm going to share with you. The first one is Dravya Guna Karma. Dravya means substance, Guna means property, and Karma means action. So you can look at a substance, determine its property or Guna, and based on its properties, you can assess what action it might have in your body. So there is a code for discovering those properties and then thereby understanding the action in your gut. And here I'd like to introduce the second principle, which is Samanya Vishesha Siddhanta. Now, this principle states that Samanya, which means similar, when I consume something which has certain properties, it will have a similar action in my body. And Vishesha means opposing, that if I have something which is opposing to what I'm experiencing, it will give me an opposite effect in my body. And I want to explain this further. Let's say I'm going to give you the example of, let's say, coconuts, because they're the easiest to understand. I see coconut water. Coconut is a dravya or a substance. And you see, what are the properties of this coconut? And it says, oh, it feels cooling. It feels nourishing. And so the action in your body then becomes cooling and nourishing. And it's very easy to understand this when you look at coconut. And it's also very easy to understand this if you were to look at chilies and say, oh my God, this chili is hot and spicy, and it makes me hot and spicy. But when you look at more complex substances and newer substances, that can feel a little bit challenging. But as we kind of go through it and we understand the code that the universe carries and that Ayurveda offers, this becomes increasingly easier. Through this program, we are going to be able to assess substances and understand the environment of our gut and see how they interact. And based on that, how does this food react in my body and build my tissue in the short term and keep me in balance in the long term? And we're going to go through this together and become our own health experts. How many times have you heard that something is really good for you and then consumed it and felt not so good? And this is why I say you are not what you eat. You're only that what you can digest. Now, this brings us back to that environment of the gut. The basic function of your food is to keep the environment of your gut right and thereby the environment of your body, or keep your body in balance in homeostasis. So we are going to try and understand this environment of the gut from an Ayurvedic perspective, which will make it much more intuitive and easy to determine what actions certain foods could have in that environment. Now, Ayurveda says that everything that you consume goes through your digestive fire or Agni. Ayurveda also states that Agni is where every single disease begins. So when your Agni is not functioning right, the environment of your body is not in balance. And when your Agni is at its optimum, health is then a given. So what is this Agni? What is this digestive fire and this digestive environment? Let's look at it a little bit closer. I want to use an example here. I mean, imagine that you're making this perfect, let's say, lasagna, and you've gathered the best ingredients. You've got a nice marinara sauce and Italian tomatoes and the best ricotta, and all your ingredients are in place. And now you put that baking dish into the oven, but your oven is not working. I mean, your dish is not going to turn out. So the missing piece here was, how did this food transform? And the functioning of the oven kind of determines whether this food can transform into lasagna or not. Similarly, we can dump our food with as many nutrients and supposedly so-called foods that are good for you. But if your body cannot process them right, you cannot really use those foods. And now this is where the concept of Agni comes in Ayurveda. Everything you consume is transformed through your Agni. What is Agni? The literal translation is a digestive fire. Agni is your ability to metabolize foods effectively. And it's really based on the environment of your gut. Now, when you hear the word digestive fire, I mean, instantly an image of fire comes to my mind. But Agni is not the dry type of fire. Agni is more like a fire with fuel. It's not a matchstick that burns out. It's an oil lamp which has a moisture or a fuel that's holding that fire. According to Ayurveda, every single disease has its origin in Agni. When the Agni is not functioning well, imbalance of the body is a given. And when the Agni functions well, balance is a given. So let's understand the nature of this Agni. What does it mean, this fire, this fuel, this warmth? And for that, I want to kind of take you back a little bit into the understanding, the ecosystem that our body carries. Now, we all know, we've all studied that we are warm-blooded. We function at a temperature of 98.7. But where do we really feel this warmth, and how does it feel? If we were to exhale into our palms, and see, that feels warm and moist. If you were to kind of even see, how does the temperature of your blood feels when you go on a blood test? The test tubes feel warm and moist. Your urine feels warm and moist. In fact, all your reproductive fluids feel warm and moist. Whenever we go off that warm and moist, if you were to urinate and sense heat, you would know that you're out of balance. Mother's milk is warm and moist. When we hear about the probiotic environment, which has become a very common health word in the last few years, what is probiotic environment? It's also known as the flora and fauna in your body. And when we look at the universe around us, where does good flora and fauna exist? It's in a place where good warmth combines with good moisture. That's where things can grow. It's like Florida in March. As soon as things go off that warm and moist, whether they become hot and humid and becomes inviting to parasites and mold, or becomes cold and dry where nothing can grow, transformation stops. So everywhere in the world, if we are going to rely upon the intelligence of the world to understand the intelligence of our body, the one thing is for certain is that when the sun and the water come together, the planet Earth happened. And when warmth and moisture meet each other, transformation happens. And that's why, as living beings, we're constantly keeping ourselves in that range of warmth and moisture. And now this brings us back to our Agni. Now, Agni, or your digestive fire, is a place where this is a little more concentrated. And keeping that basic nature alive for your Agni is your first responsibility when it comes to health, which means that any deviation, anything you consume that will take your Agni away from this warmth and moist space means that the environment will be affected. And thereby, right, this is why we see all kinds of conditions, whether it's parasites, whether it's candida, whether it's gas and bloating. That's all a functioning of an Agni going off. One of the images that I like to use when it comes to Agni is of a nice bonfire which has a good fuel and has steady amount of wind and a good amount of fire which is really being held together and keep it together. So with this understanding, right, constantly tuning in and allowing your own probiotic environment to just be nourished and to flourish, that's going to ensure that not only is your digestion functioning well, but every single organ in your body functions at its optimum. And for this, we can really use our foods and assess what they would do to our Agni and thereby how they will contribute to health or the lack of it. Now, if you're familiar with Ayurveda, the question might come up, oh, I thought I was supposed to eat for my dosha. Well, let me first get into what a dosha is and whether the prescription is for you to eat for your dosha or not. So doshas, right? Doshas are when your body has a natural tendency to move away from this warmth and moisture to either a place which is cold and sluggish, which is also known as kapha dosha, which means things kind of slow down in your body. I mean, imagine things are transforming. In the minute the ecosystem becomes cold and sluggish, then things slow down, they start building extra, and there's a feeling of overnourishment and heavy. When your body holds that tendency, you can say that, hey, I am predominant in kapha dosha. Now, there are certain bodies that have a tendency to go from this warmth and moist into hot and humid. And when things are hot and humid, they're just very fiery and you're transforming everything almost too quickly. You're responding stronger to the sun. You may have a very fierce attitude. And that is known, that bio-individual is known as, that individuality is known as pitta dosha. And when the tendency from this warm and moist is to go into cool and windy, just a lot of wind, again, effective metabolism doesn't happen. And there's more movement, there's more decline before things can really stay nourished, they're out of the system, and there's a feeling of depletion. And when your body holds that tendency, it's vata dosha. So while it is fun and easy to go and take a quiz on your dosha, the truth is your body is a very dynamic being. It's constantly changing where it stands. It may be useful to identify its basic tendency, but it's really more useful to constantly assess, is this in the warm and moist range? Am I in that balanced range? And when you start just noticing symptoms, you automatically will say, if it's too hot, I will move to cooling foods. And we will go into what those cooling foods are. Or if I'm too dry, I'm going to move into more moist. So my grandfather, who was an Ayurvedic healer and lived into his late 90s in a very healthful manner, taught all of us to eat not for our dosha, but really for our symptoms and for being in balance. So through this course, I hope you'll take this ride with me where we will learn how to assess foods and assess your body so you can learn to eat this way too.